talk. And then I would like to introduce you a little bit. Here is our 4th Asia Network meeting of the Incubating Feminist AI project, which is supported by the International Development Research Center in Canada. We are the Southeast Asian branch of the project. There are 3 main branches based in Southeast Asia, which is here, and in Latin America, and in MENA, Middle East and North and Near East, Middle East and Near East Asia. And the project is led by Caitlin Kraft Buchman from Geneva. She's an American based in Switzerland. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Jun-Yi Tan to talk with us today on the topic of AI governance in Southeast Asia. A little bit of Jun-Yi just to get us starting. Dr. Jun-Yi Tan is an independent researcher based in Malaysia with her research interests broadly anchored in the area of sustainable development, human rights, and digital communication. Her current focus is on artificial intelligence and human rights impacts within the context of Southeast Asia. Jun-Yi's newest paper, Digital Rights in Southeast Asia, Conceptual Framework and Movement Building, was published in December 2019 by Shape C in an open access book titled Exploring the Nexus Between Technologies and Human Rights, Opportunities and Challenges in Southeast Asia. More information on her website, which is junyitan.com. So we are very honored and fortunate to have you with us today, Jun-Yi, and we have to reschedule your talk because of the unforeseen circumstances on my part last week. So yeah, why not we start and you have the floor, Jun-Yi. You can start. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for inviting me. I think that as you had mentioned in the email, it will be a discussion. So what I'm going to do is kind of provide some ideas in the first half hour or so of our 90 minutes together. And then after that, we can talk more. So I've titled a little bit vaguely my title as Influencing AI Governance. Oops. Yes, and I'm gonna give some background. Actually, since the paper of digital rights in Southeast Asia, I've been producing other work, and this presentation will actually be based chiefly on this report that I wrote for Engage Media, which is Governance of AI in Southeast Asia, that was published November 2021. And a little bit about me, you've already given some intro. So I'm currently independent, but soon I will transition into a Malaysian think tank doing research. I, as you mentioned, had done research on digital rights in Southeast Asia. And then after that, the year after that was mainly looking at AI and human rights impacts. And then further on governance, what can we do about it, all in the context of Southeast Asia. And I've also spent a bit of time looking at the National 4IR policy of Malaysia within a paper that will be published soon, I think within this year. So moving on. I think that I'd like to just start with 2 key propositions, which is the first is that we need to understand what exactly we would like to govern and in what direction. And then the second is to that we need to engage with the policy processes at the level accessible to us. So these are kind of the guiding, I guess, thoughts I'd like you to have in mind as we move along, and then towards the discussion, what we would need to do, basically. So first, to understand what we are looking at, and second, how. So which means breaking down the problem of how to influence governing AI. We need to know what is AI, we need to know what is AI governance, and then thirdly, which is the question is answered in a way, in a kind of like abstract high-level way inside of the policy paper that can be downloaded. It's also open access. A Southeast Asian perspective of how can we influence AI governance. So moving along, just very quickly, because I know that you guys already know about these things, but just to give us some sort of anchor and framework to think about the problem, what is AI? So there is a definition provided by Internet Society, and I will read it from here, which is instead of giving computers step-by-step instructions to solve a problem. Oh, sorry, I must say also that this is machine learning's definition. So AI, of course, has many, many definitions. There's no like agreed one thing of what AI is, but I'd like to talk about AI in the context of machine learning, which is one of the most popular uses, applications of AI. And so it is, instead of giving computers step-by-step instructions to solve a problem, the human programmer gives the computer instructions and rules to learn from the data provided. And based on the inferences gained from the data, the computer then generates new rules to provide information and services. So in other words, it's basically algorithms, which can be defined as a sequence of instructions used to solve a problem, generating another sequence of instructions used to solve a problem. So we can then find solutions to complicated tasks that cannot be manually programmed. So fine and well, that's all just words. What does it really mean? Like when we say AI? So I thought that it would be useful to at least look at the types of AI applications. And this is drawn from researcher Kai-Fu Lee in his book AI Superpowers, published in 2018. And he's proposing that there are 4 waves of AI applications at the moment. And let's go through very quickly these types of AI. So the first is Internet AI, which basically uses our activity online that we do as the data, and then provides the service of personal recommendation systems. So for example, this would be social media feed, like what to read next, or Amazon, what to buy next, that sort of thing. So it provides very good recommendations of what to consume. And the second type is business AI, which is, for instance, in different sectors, you'd have like finance or healthcare types of businesses, companies within those fields, which have very structured data that they already have, so that they can use that data to optimize their businesses and generate insights for future uses, or predictions about the future. Thirdly, perception AI is where we have AI with eyes and ears in a way. So facial recognition systems, speech recognition systems use AI to process these real world sort of information and translate them into digital information that can be used easily. So fourthly, autonomous AI is, for instance, driverless cars, smart factories, and they basically combine robotics with the 3 types of AI above to have robots move in a way that does not need or have little human intervention. So what I'm trying to get at is that these different applications would obviously have different logics, different users, different players who are doing their business there. So it's important to know that when we talk about AI and AI governance, is not just one thing that we're looking at. So this is actually a lot. So, and then I think that here would be a good place to talk about when AI goes wrong. Because when we talk about like AI governance, we also need to see, you know, what is it that we are looking at. So part of it is three of these have been proposed by these researchers from the Berkman Internet Center, Center for Internet and Society. So very simply speaking, these are three possible, like highly avenues of how things may go wrong. So even without actually going into the technology, we can see that these are the things that matter. So first is the quality of training data. If you have data that's very skewed or very bad quality, even if you have good algorithms, the outputs will still be quite flawed. And secondly, which is system design, which is where the programmers might have their own biases coded into the system that they have designed. And therefore, they might prioritize certain variables over others. And thirdly is when the AI gets pushed into the real world to work, they might have complex interactions with the environment, which generates unintended consequences that nobody thought of before. So these are how AI can go wrong. So I think that these are, to me, is useful as someone who's interested in societal implications, or even policymakers, or even just activists and researchers that are not so into the technology can also just like have a high level look at what can go wrong here. So let's move on to what is AI governance. So we'll just use this technology by definition by the World Economic Forum, which is AI governance, or technology governance in general, is making decisions and exercising authority on the development and diffusion of technology. So where is the technology going? What can it do? What can it not do? And things like that are decisions to be made and then to be enforced and implemented. So AI governance is about that. So how do we do it? Through laws, regulations, incentive programs, frameworks, policies and standards, so on and so forth. So what is important here that I think that is important is what are we governing for? So for instance, it would be to influence the direction of AI development. So what type of applications are we more interested in? Usually when you talk to the government, it's the type that generates income or improves the economy, for instance. And then the other thing that's what we are more interested in is how do we minimize AI security risks? How do we make sure that the technology is safe, for instance, right? So technology governance, AI governance, with any sort of governance has of course, the government, the market or corporations or companies, and then there's also civil society being the three main kind of triangle trying to influence governance. So I just thought that this would be interesting to just like concretize what we mean when we talk about AI security risks. So this is from Jessica Newman, her paper, Toward AI Security, Global Aspirations for a More Resilient Future. So what she's done is to come up with 20 areas of risks, like security risks in AI. So put into 4 different buckets, which is digital, physical, political, economic, and social. And I find this quite interesting, quite useful, because it takes a systemic view of how AI moves around in the world, where a lot of discussions on AI ethics or AI harms and things like that can actually, like research out there, can be quite technical and can be quite technology focused. And it doesn't really link back into what does it mean to society, right? So check out her paper. And but here, to provide a bit of sort of shorthand to this big, beautiful map, I took the liberty to sort of summarize it into 3 main types of risk mitigation. So the first is the risk or opportunity costs of not implementing AI. So I can say that at least the Malaysian government and probably many governments in the world are mainly focused on this security area, risk area, which is, for instance, if you look at the map on top, it's looking at promotion of AI research and development, looking at training, and so on and so forth, support for small businesses and market competition and all that. Whereas less focus is being put on the two other buckets of risk mitigation. One is unintended consequences or unsafe outcomes of AI. So that, for instance, includes responsible, secure convergence or integration of AI with other technologies. There could be a lot of unintended consequences, or environmental impact, for instance, sustainability and ecology. And then the third part is when AI is being weaponized or being used for malicious purposes. And that would include, for instance, here protection from the malicious use of AI and automated cyber attacks, and disinformation and manipulation and things like that. So, bringing it back into our topic of AI governance, these are things that we need to consider, for instance, to safeguard against, right? So that's the point of why I brought this up. And of course, there are so many other areas that you can think of when you think of AI governance, but this is one example of what we can expect. So, so the next 3 slides actually focus on what I've learned within the policy paper that was published with Engage Media. All of this is within that paper, which is online. Later on, if you want, I can put the link at the chat as well. So these are the things that we found out about AI governance within our own perspective, because I feel that a lot of AI governance conversations happen actually in the global north. And the other thing is a lot of that conversation also focuses on AI ethics, which ends up being very kind of theoretical or just for the sake of argument, what is right, what is wrong. But we need to bring it back to how does it relate to us? What is our perspective? So these are the Southeast Asian perspectives that I found. So for context, about 16 respondents were interviewed for this paper, and they include lawyers, activists, and industry experts, and academics. So these are some of the results of what they've observed and what they recommend later on. So the first is the focus of governance of AI in Southeast Asia is very much on rapid adoption and innovation rather than checks and balances. And we've alluded to this in the previous AI security map slide. That is all about, not wanting to miss out, not wanting to fall off the bandwagon, rather than checks and balances of other things that AI could possibly create in terms of security or safety issues. So the second point, unclear use cases. A lot of times, a lot of data is collected, but because there's a lack of use cases, then data governance is shaky, and this has implications on security breaches and, for instance, privacy issues, and so on and so forth. So the third is that international norms need to be adapted for local governance. So for instance, we, and this is quite unanimous across different people that I've spoken to, the GDPR is considered the gold standard. It's just that it's not really applicable to us because it's difficult to implement with our local frameworks. And local ability to implement or enforce this law is nice on paper, but it doesn't. It needs to be adapted to our local situation. Fourth, that Southeast Asia is underrepresented in international standard setting, and for example, and I think that Art was the one who gave this example on how in ISO, even Singapore is just an observer. So Southeast Asia is extremely underrepresented in the area of AI. So fifth, Southeast Asian countries do not have a strong regional voice. Of course, you might ask, maybe ASEAN, but ASEAN has its own can of worms. People that I interviewed did not have very high hopes of ASEAN being the platform. And then 6, which is the state capacity to govern AI technologies, is low on average. And of course, Singapore is kind of the outlier here. They're quite advanced, but they're not really the average. And meaningful public participation in AI governance is difficult. Top down, because our institutions, our governments, our culture is very paternalistic, and we don't really invite that sort of participation. And from another angle, when you look at it from bottom up, is also that we don't have the capacities. It's difficult to create that space to participate when you don't really have the capacity or the resources to do it. And number 8, which is kind of like a general bucket of all of the things that are existing challenges, because as I like to emphasize, governance, AI governance, digital governance, whatever governance is still governance. So it still has to live within, you know, the situation of the context of where we are. So authoritarian regimes, for instance, or religious, racial, cultural sensitivities, and technical capacity, availability of quality data, and weak institutional frameworks. These are what we have to contend with, and these are the problems that are already there without us having to look at AI. So they are general governance problems in that sense. So moving on to some of the recommendations, which are general recommendations given by the data that I collected. First is we need to anchor AI governance in its societal and application context. And in other words, situating AI in society and not society in AI. So that needs to be quite clear that we do want to, of course, acknowledge that a lot of governance happens in the international arena, in standard setting, and in countries where there's a lot of activity happening there. But still, when we talk about AI governance in Southeast Asia, we need to really pull it back into what technology are we looking at, what are the local contexts, and how can we maybe participate in where the technology is used, not only where the technology is built, but also where the technology is used. So therefore, application context. So the second point on building constitutionality is about limitation of power. It's about what companies and governments can or cannot do. And this ends up being like societal conversation, really, about what do we want when we talk about such amazing technology. How do we want it implemented? Do we want to safeguard certain things and consequences such as inequalities? Or do we want to say solve climate change, that sort of thing. So these conversations need to happen on what the AI can or cannot do, what data can be collected, what cannot, that sort of thing. So the third point, which is kind of related to the first point, is considering multiple levels and sectors of policymaking. And for this, let's look at, for instance, at the international level. As I mentioned, there's a lot of international processes that looks at AI ethics, governance issues, but we can also strike at the level of region, like regional levels of policymaking, or at the national level, or at the state or local level. So, remember the proposition in front, which is what is accessible to us. Right, so is something that we need to strategize and be creative about. But I also see it as an opportunity. How can we think about the use of technology? What can we do, right, at the level that we can access? And sectors, for instance, financial and healthcare sectors are usually more regulated versus, say, the industry. Say manufacturing. And so we need to consider the different sectors having different rules of the game of their own as well. So to just bring it back to the application area. So fourth, whole of society participation. Everybody has something to contribute. Companies know how it's done, like how technology is done. Civil society already has, that link with harms and on the ground experiences. And then the government, of course, so what I'm trying to say is that we need to consider all of the things that everyone is able to bring to the table, and have this as a conversation that is multi-stakeholder. So fifth is existing regulatory frameworks and processes that may be used for AI governance. So the idea is just mainly, we don't really need like a big grand AI policy or grand AI act or so as yet. I mean, that could be an ambition that we can have, you know, but there is actually a lot of existing frameworks and processes that we should be using, for instance, like public procurement processes or competition commissions or, you know, tax, like digital tax and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to look at what we already have and use those for AI governance. So AI should not be like an exceptional thing that needs separate law and policy, even though you can do that. But there are also some things that we already have that could be possibly useful. So 6 is very straightforward, focus on data governance to reduce AI harms and increase AI benefits. So, so because the report is actually kind of anticipating an audience of civil society actors, we also provided the ways forward suggestions for civil society. So here we have the just like 5 main points, which are relatively high level. And maybe during the discussion session, we can actually talk a little bit more what we can do to relate it back into, say, feminist AI. So the first is actually to increase awareness and participation of civil society in AI governance. So I think that the problem is a lot of people do not really look at AI yet, because civil society really have, members of civil society really have a lot of problems that we are already grappling with, problems of resources, problems of like oppressive governments and things like that. But we need to make it quite clear that they need to know that AI is going to affect society in so and so way, and therefore they should try to incorporate this into their work as well. So second is to build capacity to engage in AI governance, and this include like at least 2 areas. One is what is AI and how, you know, it can go wrong. For instance, remember the content that I had alluded to in the beginning of how AI can go wrong. So these things, I think that is a capacity thing. We need to learn, we need to know what can go wrong, and then we need to know how to advocate, and that part falls into the governance processes, which is it might not be very straightforward on how decisions are made and how what are the working groups you need to engage with, for instance, and those are things that we need to train ourselves up on. So third, to form strategic networks, and of course the possibilities are a lot here. So for instance, across from academia to civil society, from civil society to technologists and all of that. So like, for instance, one of the concrete suggestions is that we as civil society can actually reach out to, say, AI associations or big data associations, interest groups within our own countries, and have like a channel for knowledge exchange and communication, because we need to learn from them what the technology is, and they need to learn from us of how, you know, things can go wrong, and this should be a fruitful collaboration or network. And then fourth is to conduct more research and documentation of lived experiences of how people are actually affected by AI applications. And this is quite important because we are using a lot of those technology, but is that, but a lot of research mainly still focus on the global north, and we need, for instance, information on how AI is affecting work. For instance, this is one of the projects actually that I'm doing with a bunch of researchers on collecting stories of AI in informal work in Southeast Asia. So more of this sort of research and documentation. So number 5 is to leverage on existing capacities on human rights and community work. This also has the link between the previous slide on how we should actually use something that we have already. So a lot of human rights people are very good at civil and political rights, are very knowledgeable about these technical issues in a way, international human rights issues. We just need to apply those knowledge into the area of AI. And on the topic of community work in Southeast Asia, there's also a lot of community-based organizations that have, for instance, mutual benefit associations, or groups that are race-based and things like that. So a lot of that groundwork can actually be leveraged. I mean, of course, it's a lot of work, but what I'm trying to say is that there are opportunities and we can do something. So that's kind of the end of my presentation of what had been learned, what the lessons learned from the writing of the policy process, the policy paper. And I think that my idea in building this presentation for today is kind of to expose the processes of thinking, which I had mentioned in the beginning, which is what exactly are we governing and towards what direction. And then the second is we need to engage with policy processes within our grasp. And so I was thinking that it could be useful to use that as a jumping board to then view it from the lens of feminist AI in your group's capacity, and consider the following questions. For instance, what are the challenges within our context, or your context, my context, our context? What are the possible avenues of intervention at what policy level, for instance? What are the possible strategies? Some were proposed before. Maybe you might find some useful, some are not relevant. Yeah, so that would be our discussion for now.
Thanks so much, Chun-Yi, for your very insightful talk. I have a lot of points that we can discuss together. But perhaps anybody in the audience might have questions, comments. We have a lot of time. We have until 4:30 or 5:30 for Chun-Yi. About 50 minutes for our discussion.
I have some question. Well, what do you think that makes? What do you think that about ASEAN that make our region is so unique? In our context, what is there any specific feature in our region that makes the problem of governing AI so unique? But one thing I think of is that language, because mostly we don't own the technology, and we mostly use English feature in AI, and we have many language in our region, but I don't know what do you think that make our region so unique in the problem of governing AI?
I see. So there are two things that I can think of. One is diversity, as you have mentioned, that we have a diverse range of races, religions, and languages, and all of that are great. But they're not very, it's not like we could be like in, say, Latin America, where they have like 2 languages that they can talk, across borders. And that helps a lot, I think, in generating resources or having collaborations and networks. Information just goes quicker when there's less friction in terms of language and culture. I think the second one that is not my point, but I had heard it from somebody else, that there's no unifying issue. As in, there are too many issues. There's not like one big issue where we can all jump in and say, yes, we don't want that, or we agree. So I cannot remember what other regions have as unifying issue, because as I said, this is not my point, somebody else's point. But from what I understand, for instance, Africa has their main issue of, I don't know, some I'm not going to make up things. So they have some sort of issue that unites them. And for us, we don't have that unifying kind of thing. So I guess the lack of regional, like ASEAN itself has its own history, has its own problems with civil society, for instance, and all that. So that's also like the lack of a common platform as well, where people can get together and talk about these things. We have ASEAN People's Forum, for instance. We can use those. And I also think that, and somebody within the interviews was actually saying that academia can be a good platform, because basically academics usually speak English. That's the thing, like the language issue. And AI governance, for instance, could be how do you say, a conference, and then you would have all of these academics coming together and discussing these issues that actually affect us in the region. But yeah, I don't know if we're like unique in that we're having trouble with AI governance, but there are definitely certain challenges that is Southeast Asian.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just can find, it's good that we can find some ground that we have in common to understand the new technologies together.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think Chert is right in saying that there are a lot of diversities within the Southeast Asian region. We have a lot of religions. Thailand and Cambodia and Laos are Theravada Buddhist. Vietnam is Mahayana Buddhist. Malaysia is Mahayana Buddhist, and Philippines is Roman Catholic, and so on and so on. We can recount the diversity in traditions and religions quite a lot. However, I think there are some common threads that kind of bind the regions together. Mm-hmm. If we look at the region as a whole, I think all of us here in the region are, from the perspective of the government, at least as I perceive, they are interested in development, in economic development, in prosperity, in catching up, so to speak. At least in Thailand, people in the leading circles always talk about Thailand needing to catch up with the West and to learn all the technologies that are being imported from the West. And AI is one of those technologies that are impacting and creating an impact at the moment. So that's one thing, and it's a very fascinating topic to talk about, diversity and commonalities among all these countries and cultures and traditions in the region. And another thing I would like to get us thinking together is that, as you said, Chuni, there are a lot of AI guidelines at the moment and at many levels. I am a member of a committee set up by the NSTDA, National Science and Technology Development Agency, and they would like to draft their own guideline for AI ethics for use in their own agency, which is large. It consists of people doing computer technology, bioengineering, material science, and so on. So, but it's only one agency within the country, and at the same time, the ministry, at the government level, the host is the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. They are drafting. They have done it, and they completed a draft. It's only in Thai right now, but I think it's going to be translated into English soon. It's about 30 pages, and the title is Thailand AI Ethics Guidelines. That's a rough translation, and it has been approved by the Thai cabinet right before COVID, I think in December 2019. However, after the approval, I have not heard of anything new coming, as a result of the adoption of the national guidelines. So we have a lot of guidelines at various levels, and this does not only happen in Thailand. We have a very large number of guidelines all over the world, and most of them share some basic principles like privacy, autonomy, and so on. But there are some divergences. However, not very many guidelines, as I have seen them, as I have read them, not many mention much of anything about gender equality or feminist issues, or the topic that this project is concerned with. So I think that is the area that we can work on. And our last previous talk, we had a group of philosophers from the Philippines talking about the need for women to have a safe transportation, public transportation in the city, and they wonder how AI could help with that. A very interesting talk about a few weeks ago. So that is some of the concrete issues that have come up that could well be a part of the discussion on the governance of AI in the region. So I don't have a question, just thinking out loud. Yeah.
So what do you think of the ethical guidelines that you have? I mean, obviously I cannot read it, so I'd love to know what you think about it.
Oh, they have some basic principles: privacy, autonomy, lack of bias, and a curious principle which is not found in other guidelines is that it's competitiveness. I mean, Thailand should aim at utilizing the AI technology in such a way that promotes the economic competitiveness of the country. And this is the number one principle in the Thailand AI ethics guideline. If you're interested, I have written a paper. I mean, I summarized all these guidelines in Thailand in a paper, and I think I can share, give me some time. I have to look it up, and I can share the link to the paper. It was published in JICS, Journal of Information, Communication and Ethics in Society, about 2 years ago. And I look at some of the peculiarities of the Thailand guidelines, the one that was adopted by the Ministry of Science that I told you about. And that gave us kind of, things for reflection. And as for gender equality, it's a very important issue, which has not been, I mean, I have not found that in these guidelines, a clear emphasis on gender issues, which is, I think, represents a kind of a lack of attention or kind of something that need to be worked on afterwards. Yeah.
I would love to get a copy of the paper.
Yeah. Certainly, I give you. I have to look it up.
And I'm also having a follow-up question, which is, does it say anything about how to implement, or in what scope of implementation, who's going to do it, that sort of thing?
Oh, yes. We have the ministry as far as the structure of governance is concerned. They are concerned with science policy and things concerning how the technology is how the governance of the technology is laid out and formulated, and it is expected that agencies within the country follow these guidelines. It's not required, it's not a law, it's only a guideline. So it's only a set of recommendations. So research institutes such as the NSTDA or the universities, especially the private companies, are expected to follow these guidelines. But I have yet to see how this is implemented in reality. Perhaps it's too early. And AI technology as a whole, if we talk about machine learning and so on, there are some Thai companies who are doing works on these technologies. But as far as I know, they have not made much of an impact. The talk on AI and the potentials of AI technology in Thailand at the moment is about, they are making promises for the future. They talk about such things like AI has the power to create this and that kind, and it has the power to help companies doing a lot of things and making more profit, that kind of thing. These are the kind of talks that people find mostly when you look at the AI scene in Thailand. Only people like Gerd and myself and artists who are concerned with the social aspect, but at least it's a beginning, and we believe that as you said, the technicians need to learn from us, the potentially harmful consequences of AI, or the best possible use or applications of AI, such as to create a more equal society and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. More conversations need to be had.
Right. Of course. But anybody has any points to make? So I like your questions a lot. And that the questions that we see on screen right now. Challenges within our context. When we talk about Thailand, we have to factor in. We cannot fail to factor in the very serious transformation that is going on inside the country, the clash between the established older generation and the younger generation, and the need, what should I say, the need for the country to move forward, and the political struggle that is reflected from that. So we have in Thailand a lot of challenges at many levels, but that represents the points that we need to as academic as like myself, to understand first and to suggest way forward.
I think in a way, because we are talking within the area of AI governance, we see it as the main thing. But then when you put it into the big pool of what's going on in the world or going on in our individual countries, it's actually not that big. It's important, but it's still drowned out by all of the challenges that we have. Yeah, totally. The political problems and all of that, same in Malaysia.
Yeah, right.
So I was, I guess, wondering about if you guys would have some possible strategies in like as a project that you have the A+ Alliance. What are there any strategies that you guys might already have?
We are focusing on research on understanding how AI could contribute to a more gender equal society in what ways. So we are the big part of what we are doing is to encourage people from all around the world to think of this question and to submit their proposals. The proposal for the call for proposals have just been concluded, and yes, Caitlin, and we have got some very interesting proposals, and Caitlin, the leader of the project, will talk about this. Caitlin, you can talk. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I've been having it's a holiday here. I'm going to try and see if my connectivity works.
We can hear you very well.
Great. I'll even try and see if I get a camera going. But it was a really, really interesting presentation. Thank you, June. About what our strategy is really to try and see whether, our point of view is that we want that feminist AI is pro-social AI. So we want to see AI that's made always with equality at the core, considerations of gender, race, class, caste at its core, and solve social problems, as opposed to being a pizza app or being, do you know what I mean? A messaging platform that might not have moderation or might let people be harassed. So it would always have that at its center. So our projects are applied research projects. We're starting with the research, but we're about to go to the prototype phase for at least one project with our scientific advisory committee within the next month and a half. And then we hope to pilot. So, so it's not only, I think what we're wrestling with is that we're all of us becoming aware of a lot of the mitigation risks that you really very beautifully pointed out in your talk. And what we really want to try and do is to see how you can build something that has less of those risks, or at least is accountable, or at least has a plan for managing its life cycle. So it's not only making sure that the data is documented and it's correct and it's unbiased, but everything through its machine learning life has something that gives value to people. Can I just say one more thing about all the guidelines? There's also UNESCO, of course, which I think every country has signed on to, at least 189. And in there, they're the only, I think that's one of, we're really into those guidelines because of course they have actually mentioned gender, the only ones that do. And most ethical guidelines are very a la carte, right? That's why also the A+ Alliance is taking a human rights-based approach, taking this settled body of international law and saying that, well, why don't you just apply it to AI? We don't need to make new, we don't have to start from scratch, for sure. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, I think it's quite important that you've pointed out that it needs to be based on research. because I think that a lot of times it's just you just stick technology into somewhere and then hope that it grows, or like pour lots of resources in and then make sure it grows, whether or not it's needed really in the context that is given is another question. That's where, you know, like maybe sometimes technology is really not the answer to the problem. So basing the technology first on research, and possibly the question that I have out of curiosity is what sort of research, right? So is it like, because I come from more anthropological sort of angle as well, is it considered, for instance, how people use the technology and all of that as being part of the research, so that it doesn't come in and clash with the context, right?
Right. And we do, you know, one of our partners at Women at the Table is a digital anthropologist. So yeah, we love the anthropological perspective. For the A+ Alliance, we're really trying to move past sitting around and doing, I'm an activist, and all my colleagues are academics. We're really trying to figure out how to make it active. So we wanted to benefit from research, from all the extraordinary research that's being done, but not to just completely each time just replicate or just say, and guess what, it's popping up in these areas, but to have a problem statement that's about how technology might solve a particular problem. Then the first part of our process is like, you know, the lit review, but also just saying what is the tech that would be built. But we are asking people to come up with a problem statement and go forward. Now, for example, in our first call for papers, we had people come up, really extraordinary academics, but they had problem statements that our scientific advisory committee just didn't want to go there. They didn't want to go for predictive analytics for gender-based violence with police departments, because they felt that that was putting, particularly in the particular countries and contexts that we're talking about, they're saying, you know, we're opening ourselves up to, yes, it will identify these women, but are we putting them more at risk than putting them at harm? So there's also those kinds of questions. There were people that said, let's, in another region, let's incentivize women to do AI. We'll take LinkedIn profiles and then we'll target them. And we just said, but we don't have their privacy and consent. So that's a really lovely idea. And yes, in gross, of course we want more women in AI and we want more women from your region, but we think that by going and invading their privacy and dragging them into the public spotlight, that would not adhere to our principles to do so. So we ask people to have a really strong research question, but then we also have, and that was the one thing we're very strong on the second cohort, which we haven't discussed yet. We've all just gotten them in, and we're all about to discuss them actually tomorrow, is to say, what are your mitigation and risk plans? That we made that a much, 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 much stronger part of it, because even the most well-meaning people hadn't thought through all of the possibilities. And in final, because you have great questions, so I think you should go on just asking everybody questions, is that the problem I think that we saw was that it was when technologists were not adequately consulting with anthropologists, social scientists, that these particular teams had those kinds of conversations, they probably wouldn't have had the kind of reaction from us that they did. That said, it's like, in order to apply, you have to be bringing somebody from sort of your complementary, you know, on the color wheel of science, you know, social science, hard science discipline. We're saying that you have to, we've always said that it has to be a multidisciplinary team.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I really think that interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary aspect of the area is not emphasized enough, and really needs to have all these people have their say. Even philosophers have a lot to say, really, on what is right and what is wrong, and of course, social scientists in general, and the technologists coming in to make sure we can really build this thing. Yeah.
You know, I was talking to a researcher from and he said, it's very interesting. The research that we're doing is from Data and Society. He said, the research we're doing shows that basically the Northern perspective is that AI is a tool, because I was just about to say AI is a tool and it depends on how you use it.
Mhm.
But what we're finding is that people from the majority South think of AI as an extraction as opposed to a tool. I don't know what you think of that statement. It's kind of disturbed me and I'm wrestling with it.
Well, a tool for what is the question? So as in, if the people from the North think that is a tool, so what is it used for?
But that's exactly, I mean, that's our position, is that it can be, tools can be used for anything. I mean, that's why we say we shape our tools, therefore our tools shape us. I mean, we know this is the history of technology, right? What we build winds up
Right,
shaping
right.
our actions and our societies. But it is just a tool as opposed to, it's the idea of agency, I suppose. I was just surprised by his research that when you're, I suppose, come from a hemisphere of privilege in a way that you think of it as being something that you could use to act either rightly or wrongly. Whereas if you're thinking of yourself as being more of a, with less agency, you would think of it as extracting.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think I can add a little bit to that. In Thailand, for example, as I said, we tend to view new technologies as, of course, coming from the West, and the attitude has always been that we need to adapt ourselves. We need to react to these imports, to these new things that come from the West. And there is, as you said, the word extraction kind of captures the idea quite well. There is an imbalance of power. I think the key idea in the word extraction is the imbalance of power between the West, between the founder or the designer of the technology, and those of us in the global South who are mostly on the receiving end of the technology or the products created by the technology. So the idea is to extract resources from the South flowing up to the North, and it has this idea, and perhaps the global policy needs to address this issue.
But you know what's interesting, Suraj, that you said when you talked about power dynamics, because that brings it back to sort of what gender transformative policy is and feminist policy, which is about transforming power dynamics. So I think that part of our joint project is also how do we change the power dynamics within regions, but also within the globe to incorporate these principles, right? So, and what would that feminist AI look like in Southeast Asia really is, or Africa, or I also want to say, June, that you had said, that somebody had said that Africa has one problem, which I know that they would disagree with you a lot, but let's say even if it were climate change, which I would say is probably Southeast Asia problem, as well as all of ours collectively. What we're also trying to do with the work that, especially that we're doing in Africa, is to try and get all of the climate change tech that's being conceived to be conceived also with gender at the same time, because the climate change, women farmers being sort of, at least in Africa, 80% of the smallholder farmer force, it all sort of ties together into this kind of poverty dynamic that we think if we can do things holistically, instead of saying gender's here, climate's there, north-south extraction is there. And by the way, there's a lot of, it's not only the West, it's also coming from the East. I think that there were people who would say that China is doing just as much AI as Europe and US, or certainly Europe and the US would say that. So
I have a couple of thoughts that I'll like put them out there before I forget them. I think it's very interesting, the whole thing about extraction, and basically our experiences post-colonial would kind of cloud or give not cloud, actually just give us a different lens to look at the issue. As Suraj had rightly pointed out, that a lot of resources go from the south to the north. And at this point also, I think that it also must be said that it's not just one global north, one global south, but in the north, there are north and south. And in the south, that there are north and south also. So it's not so easy in that sense, right? And the inequality is just at different levels, and extraction is also at different levels, which is to say that the tool that we are talking about, we really need to interrogate the logic of it, because if the logic of the tool is still based on accumulation and limitless growth per se, you know, then we're going to have the same. No matter where the tool comes from, whether it's the north or the south, you know, whether it's a unicorn based anywhere, it's all extraction. So I applaud, I mean, your efforts in trying to build technologies that really do act as a tool, because at this moment, I think in time, we really do need those tools that operate on different logics, so that they actually solve our problems and not just give us, you know, accelerated problems of the same sort. So have I? Yeah, I think I've talked about it. All my thoughts are out. So please continue.
I agree with what you have to say. I also feel like it's not, I just couldn't help myself. I'm a fan of your work, so Suraj knows that. So I'm sorry that I just said. I know we have other people in the audience if you want to ask a question. Otherwise, I know that we're happy to keep chatting, but I don't want to shut.
We have a small group.
It is, okay.
We have my colleague Chert and Arinda. And Arinda said she might not be available because she's always busy with her things.
Yeah. So I want to actually, so that, could I ask a question also? When you're saying, June, that GDPR is great, but like it's not context specific, so it's not enforceable. How would you go about then creating a GDPR like? So what's a solution? What's the path for you in Southeast Asia to get?
I think that our problem here is that we are trying to just adopt wholesale of something that has been consulted and negotiated in a context that's not ours. So so there could be multiple problems with this, right? Like for instance, our ideas of consent might not be the same, or our ideas of privacy might not even be the same. So we can't really, we need to have our own societal conversations first to talk about how to go about these things. Like for instance, Suraj just now had mentioned about the economic part of it, which is a huge conversation here. And that's probably something that we need to talk about also, that you know, our context would shape the conversation and not that GDPR would shape the conversation, if it makes sense.
That's not, I wasn't asking about adopting it. I'm just saying how wanting and very intelligently and rightly so, you know, your own context specific rules and frameworks. How are you going to go? What's your pathway to arriving at those context specific frameworks for Southeast Asia? I wasn't suggesting you adopt GDPR. I was just saying, how are you going to make that happen?
Right.
Whatever it is for your region.
It depends, I guess, if you're going to do it as a region or if you're going to do it as a country, or, you know, it depends where it happens, that conversation. But I don't really think that the conversation or related processes are happening enough. And instead, we are just trying to adopt what is there. So I am not very privy to all of the processes that are happening. So I'm sure that there are avenues for these things to happen and to be discussed. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of times there's just no discussion. It's just that, we have the gold standard, let's just use that. So that would be a bit problematic.
Yeah, in our case in Thailand, we have just had our new law announced, enforced. It's the Personal Data Protection Act, and it is modeled from the European GDPR. But people kind of don't have a clear idea on what the law is about, and many people are becoming kind of afraid of, they are told that when they share a picture on Facebook, for example, and the picture contains other parties, other people who just happen to be in the picture, they are liable. They might violate the law, for example. So there is not, as Junie said, there is not much discussion on the ideas behind the law and what constitutes personal privacy. In what case is it okay? Is it okay to share your own the pictures of your own children without asking for their consent? It's part of the culture in the East, that parents usually don't ask for consent of their children, and many teenagers are getting, they are starting to become more autonomous, and this is the process of learning and transformation that is going on. I think not only in Thailand but all over the region. Parents love to share pictures of their babies and their children, and as the result,
at some point they'll,
as a result of the PDPA, Personal Data Protection Act, they are getting afraid, they are getting worried, and then they are starting to talk about, whether it's wrong and how come I'm sharing the picture for my personal use, but I'm sharing this sometimes publicly to tell the world about my own children and so on. So basically, the idea is that people are getting used to the whole set of ideas about personal autonomy and privacy and so on that they have not talked about. It's not part of the discourse of the people in this culture, especially in Thailand, or at least in Thailand before. So this is what is happening, and then we will see how it turns out.
I had an early, many years ago, my son demanded I stop sharing pictures of him. So it's very funny. We were sort of like ahead of the curve because I had children that just said, we don't want to be instrumentalized to show what a beautiful life you're leading. And it's interesting that it's sort of become that. I think it has to do with that generation in the West. Anyway, that's a separate and fascinating conversation, especially since but I am of the belief that privacy, the privacy conversation, which is so important, is sort of the digital rights world, really owns that and drives that. And I'm therefore, I'm hoping that we will continue to stay, even though we believe in privacy and consent and autonomy, on this structural change route, which is that it's not merely about optimizing processes or merely about being competitive. It's great to be competitive. It's not merely about being efficient. It's great to be efficient, but it's also, in the greater scheme of things, is how effective can we be to help deliver sort of greater equality, because I think that that's what creates stability just as much as economic stability. It is anyway. That's feminist theory that we're adhering to. I don't know. And by the way, is it June or June-E? I want to call you June-E, and then I just was realizing when that's probably more correct.
Yeah, it's June-E.
Sorry, and I apologize.
Sorry, no worries.
Sorry. But so what do you think about this, about the whole idea of like power dynamics changing and that being sort of part of the conversation, or is that too scary?
Power dynamics changing in what sense?
Well, you know, where power dynamics changing. Well, the feminist definition would be it's for women, girls, people of all genders, anybody that's marginalized. Basically, the powerless is feminist theory. Is the powerless need to be part of the discussion? And let me put my question a different way. There's a lot of talk, mostly we worry, or governments are everywhere around the world. This has nothing to do with geography, are just trying to optimize processes. So it's like, let's make sure there's less traffic. Let's make sure the traffic lights, that was Smart City 1.0, right? It's like, you know, okay, we're going to make the traffic lights go, less traffic jams, as opposed to looking at, you know, why there's traffic, why there isn't public transport, when you're public transport, looking at chained ways of movement instead of going A to B, just do you know, all this kind of more social science research. So that would be looking more at the system than optimizing what you already have. And that's, I think that's the kind of the difference about what we're trying to do, is like, it's maybe what optimizing for X isn't really where we want to go. Maybe we want to create a new equation.
Yeah, definitely. I as I mentioned before, it's all about, to me, it's all about the logic. If you want to build a tool, what sort of logic are you using? Is it optimizing? And optimizing itself has, of course, its problems. When you're moving very quickly at a very unsustainable way in general, you can see where it's brought us now. So, it's a way of thinking, I feel, that we are entrenched in. That even if we want to move, you know, in terms of gender equality, we still want to do it quick now, you know, optimize it, that sort of thing. But at the same process, and this is a bit of a tangent, a lot of labor rights violations that I see are actually within the human rights sector. So, you know, it's not human rights.
Like what, like, meaning?
Okay,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is that, like, for instance, a lot of labor rights violations, precarious work, pay with low pay, high work, no overtime pay, precarious as in, you know, no contract, and the culture, toxic work culture of overworking, and all of that. I'm trying to just expand on a lot of issues that we have within the human rights sector, because I am also within the sector myself. A lot of times I see that the violations are just a problem of optimization in a way. Because when we get there, when we get to democracy, that's when we will have time to have things like labor rights. So until then, let's just, you know, treat our employees badly, and treat our contractors badly, and like pay them very low for a lot of work, because, you know, that sort of thing. So what I'm trying to say is that the logic is the same. The logic of what you're doing is the same as the people that you're trying to fight against, and that's not sustainable. And if I always look at things from a sustainability angle. Is this sustainable or not? Are we growing too fast? Are we oppressing our people?
So what would you like to see built to use AI in terms of looking at your research, in terms of what do you think is needed?
That's a very interesting question, because a lot of times it's about finding problems, right? About the technology, why we don't want it. And I guess the technology has to firstly be used on things that are not purely for economic purposes.
No, but what specifically do you have you thought about something that's this is the problem we're having. Lots of researchers know what they don't. Everybody knows what they don't. Not everybody knows what they don't want, but a lot of smart people know what they don't want. But what is it that people want? Where's the there? I mean, we've been trying to talk to different big international NGOs, and it's very hard because they advocate for things, but they don't actually have systems that they've actually thought through. So are there things that you think could help people that you wish were built, or do you have a wish list?
So I would just have like broad visions, right? I don't know how to implement these things. When we talk about care, for instance, when we talk about a good working environment, what needs to be in place for us to have proper work-life balance. So I think that's like a broad, big idea. Or how can we, a lot of those issues in the feminist area are actually like broad, big ideas, right? How to create a more equal society. And then you try to break it down into more specific problems. So like, for instance, I feel that not enough of technology is being put to slow climate change. But what specifically are those technologies? I'm not sure, because I'm not within that area per se, right? So for instance, could it be monitoring the cutting down of trees in an automated way so that it's easier? That could be one way to do it, right? Using these technologies to monitor, to stop, to stop fossil fuels from coming out from the ground. So I do think that a lot of times this is a limitation of not enough of imagination, as you pointed out. What is it that you would like instead of what is it that you would not like? And I think what you're doing here is quite important, because you're giving people space and the resources to imagine and to implement what they imagine. So for me, it's really just big, broad things that I would like to have as a citizen of this planet. So, not worrying about climate change would be great, for instance. Having a 4-day work week will be great, for instance. What's all this optimization without, actual impact, like positive impact on my life when I'm working 6 days a week, instead of 4. So yeah, I could go on and on, but yeah.
Yeah, it's almost 4:30 here in Bangkok, and we are approaching the end of the meeting. Anybody would like to have one last question, one last point before we end? In that case, we would like to thank you very much, Chun-Yi, for your time and for your insightful talk. Certainly we'll keep in touch. And thank you very much for your talk today.
Into your paper, so that
my paper, by the way. So this concludes the 4th Asia Network meeting. We will announce about the next network meeting very soon. Thank you very much. So I'm ending the recording right